Well, thanks for coming, everybody. I really appreciate your support. It's just fantastic to get to this part of the project where we've got something in print and we can start to talk about it. So we're actually all extraordinarily fortunate to be alive in this particular time in human history, just because it's really the first time that we've really understood the aging process at a cellular level. Maybe a decade ago, aging was about grey hair and wrinkles or no hair, as it happens. But we're really getting under the hood, and it's really becoming clear that aging is actually the biggest risk for many of the diseases that we get of old age. So, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, cancer, those sorts of things. There's been a huge amount of research going into these problems, and we've made amazing progress. But a couple of bright sparks over the last decade or so, I've started to go, wait a second, if we could actually slow this aging process, maybe actually we could delay some of these diseases of old age. And so that's exactly what researchers are starting to do, and they're starting to make some fantastic progress. So what we're going to do tonight is just do a little bit of a tiki tour through the book. I'm not going to keep you for the 3-hour version of it, but we're going to talk a little bit about aging and sort of what the human potential is for aging. We're going to discuss what was learnt in some interesting places around the world called the blue zones, where there are groups of people with extraordinary longevity. We're going to do a deeper dive into these things called the 9 hallmarks and work out what they are. And at the end, we're just going to talk about a couple of molecules that are actually showing significant effect in anti-aging, which is really just to show that this stuff is actually happening and happening now. Cool, so the first thing I want to talk about is the difference between lifespan and life expectancy, and they're quite different. Lifespan is the longest period of life that any species is going to extend, versus life expectancy, which is the average age or time that we can expect to be on the planet. So human lifespan, the maximum that we know for now, is going to tap out at about 115. These people are outliers, and it's a really elite group of people that get there. There's only been around 1,700 that have been recorded. And then there's outliers amongst the outliers. And this young lady here is a lady called Jean Calmet, and she is the world's oldest recorded human being. Jean survived until 122. Now there is a wee bit of controversy around this particular lady, and that she had a really, really good pension scheme, and it could be that we're looking at her daughter here who collected that pension for a little bit longer. But most centenarians, these are people who live over the age of 110, typically going to tap out at that 115 mark. And I want to keep you to keep that number in mind, because it kind of gives us clues as to what our aging potentially actually is. All right, so life expectancy is quite different, and where you're born plays a huge part of it. So in New Zealand, the life expectancy is 82, and we're ranked number 15 in the world, which is it's pretty good. Life expectancy is the average age that you're likely to make in a particular population. But if you draw perhaps the short straw and you live in a place like Chad in Central Africa, things don't look so bright. In Chad, the life expectancy is only 50. And it's not that these people in Chad get old and wrinkled and drop dead at 50. It's actually that there's a lot of issues around nutrition, childhood mortality, maybe there's a little bit of conflict, throw in a pandemic, and all of a sudden you've got events to conspire you, and it drags the life expectancy down. What's a little sobering really is that only 100 to 150 years ago that we were Chad. Life expectancy in what we call the developed world now was around the 50 mark. And that was typically because if you were a parent, you would typically lose between 2 and 3 children and just expect to do that before the age of 5. And that's what dragged it all down. For most of human history, it's thought that we've had a life expectancy of around 25 to 40. However, from the mid-1800s, human life expectancy has absolutely rocketed. And in fact, life expectancy has grown between 2 to 3 or even 4 years every generation. These gains are really about us understanding more about our environment, how that environment affects us, and also understanding what's going on inside ourselves. And as we continue to accelerate our knowledge around that, this is when we start to get the big gains. So these gains And this accelerated life expectancy is actually around solving some of the problems around childhood mortality, which actually meant that it just helps these kids survive into adulthood. And then once you get into adulthood, then you're away and you've got a very good chance of living into your 60s, 70s, 80s and even 90s. So I think we're actually getting fairly close to exhausting all the gains that we're going to make in terms of life expectancy by curing some of these problems from childhood. And now the work starts to happen on how do we solve some of the issues around the diseases that we get with old age. And we're doing a fantastic job of that. The fastest growing group of people or cohort of people in the world is actually the Centenarians, and that's just telling us that we're actually getting things right and we're starting to extend life in older age as well. So we can pretty much expect that that'll continue, and I think what we'll end up doing is actually compressing that life expectancy and start bringing it right up to what we know as our lifespan. And at some point we'll get outliers there and people will start shifting towards 130, even longer. A number of anti-aging researchers actually think that 115 is kind of our 4-minute mile moment, and then once we actually exceed that we'll be off to the races and we'll may live for hundreds of years, which is pretty inconceivable right now, but it's completely possible. But what I want to talk about is what we've got available to us now versus what we might have down the road. And so I thought what we'd do is go and have a visit to these places called the blue zones. So the blue zones, the result, were discovered by a chap called Dan Buettner, who was a longevity expert. And he partnered up with National Geographic, and they went around the world and they tried to find whether there were places around the world where people lived for extraordinary long periods of time. And what they found were 5 particular places around the world, which you can see up there. So in these zones, your chances of living to 100 were significantly beyond what you and I might expect. And so they then started to study these people to understand what they were doing that was different than what we're doing, just to try and get some hints to understand, okay, what is the secret? So the results were really, really interesting. So what they found was that all 4 areas there were 4 key areas, that they all had in common. The first thing is that they moved a whole bunch. Their lifestyles were set up so that they moved every day, whether it was for work, for pleasure, for whatever it was, they moved a bunch. The other thing they did was they had a plant-based diet, and in fact they did something a wee bit different as well. They had their biggest meal in the morning, and they also had a consistent habit of stopping eating before they got full. And so that was probably one of the biggest signals or strongest thing that they all did. The other thing they did was that they had really strong family connections and social connections. And what Dan and the team at National Geographic identified was that actually those social connections that we have actually add 7 years to our lives. So it's really it's important that you next time you see a mate or your partner, to give them a hug, because they're actually making a really big difference in your longevity, if you will. And then the other thing they found is all these people had some form of faith or some sort of purpose for getting out of bed in the morning. And it could be just a service-based faith or it could be a religious faith. And it didn't seem to matter exactly what it was, but they all had this, and it significantly contributed to their aging trajectory. So these are really cool insights and things that we can all do day to day. But if we want to take it to the next level, then we need to go into the next step. And this is where the hallmarks of aging come in. So what's a hallmark? Well, the description is there behind me, but essentially what it is it's actually a scientific consensus. And these consensuses can take a very long time because there's a bunch of scientists arguing, but ultimately what we end up with is a truth that you can test and measure, and it's consistent. There's hallmarks for aging that we'll talk about, but there's also hallmarks for cancer, for Parkinson's, and even COVID-19. They're really important for researchers because what they do is they give researchers a clear focus, a clear direction on what to focus on. So you then start to look at how we can fix some of these things. So this is the cover of the Cell magazine that dropped in June 2013 that had a small paper in it called The Hallmarks of Aging. It's a very inauspicious cover for a journal with such an important paper. The Hallmarks of Aging paper covered 9 areas of our cells that everybody agreed get worse as we age. So those, I won't read them all, but essentially 3 of them relate really strongly to DNA that's in our cells. The other 3 relate to a lot to do with the energy that we've got in our cells. And then the last 3 are a lot to do with just the cellular housekeeping that happens and the decline of that and how it affects our age. And all of these components had 3 key things that were in common that should manifest during normal aging. If you go into the lab and you have a play with it and you make it worse, it accelerates aging. And if you do the opposite and you make it better, then it can slow aging. This is a really important piece of work, and this paper is being cited in so many places simply because what it did was it gave anti-aging researchers a place to look and a target to look. So this has actually unleashed a huge amount of research effort. There are tens of billions of dollars right now going into understanding how we can make these hallmarks of aging better. And there's a big prize, obviously, if they get it right, because if we can solve the aging problem, if we can actually start to live a little bit longer and defer some of those diseases of aging, then why wouldn't we all get in there and do it? So I want to look at one hallmark, just to get a little closer, just to illustrate exactly its link to aging, and we're going to talk about genomic instability. Now, genomic instability is actually relates to our genes and how stable our genes are, and our genes all hang out in our DNA. So this is all about our DNA, and I'm sure most of you know what DNA is, but essentially it is the cellular instruction set, which is tucked away in everybody's cell, and it tells a heart cell to be a heart cell, a brain cell to be a brain cell, and it also means that it also provides the instructions for all the proteins and cellular components in a cell. How it works essentially is when a cell needs a new protein. I don't quite know how it works, but basically the DNA opens up, provides the instruction set for that protein, a little messenger pops in, reads it, and then pops over to the protein manufacturing unit in the cell, and next minute you've got a protein that's being manufactured. This happens every single second and nanosecond of the day. We have and make 200 million red blood cells every day. And so you can imagine the cells that are making these are incredibly busy because they've not got to just make the cells, they've got to make all the proteins and components inside it. So even when we're at rest, our body is working absolutely flat out. So I was really hoping to show you a fancy video of a bit of DNA and the repair mechanisms associated with it, but at the last minute the guys that I asked permission to use this video said I couldn't. So I really encourage you to go and have a look at these DNA animations and DNA repair animations. It's almost alien and kind of freaky when you look at it, and it's almost hard to believe that this is going on inside us. And I think what blows me away is actually that we're around on a planet where we can actually start to see this stuff. Your DNA breaks 50 to 100,000 times a day, and that's not just in your body, that's in every single cell. We've got 30 to 40 trillion cells in our body, so our DNA is getting smashed. It's an incredibly hostile environment for our DNA. Things like UV, pollution, internal oxidative stress all conspire against our DNA and break it. So because of that, our body puts a huge amount of effort into resources to repair and maintain and look after that DNA, because it's really, really important. Because when DNA goes wrong, we get some really interesting clues as to how important our DNA is. So these beautiful children here have got something called progeria, and progeria is caused by a mutation that happens in the nuclear membrane, the membrane that surrounds the DNA that we've got in our cells. Up in the top right here, you've got a DNA membrane, which is pretty much what all of us have all got here. It's nice and round and nice and good. These guys with their mutation, their DNA membrane is all buckled, and it interferes with the ability for them to repair and maintain their DNA. So what's happening here is these guys have got accelerated aging purely because they can't repair their DNA, and this manifests in these guys passing away generally from the diseases of old age, from the age of 14 up to perhaps 18. So It is heartbreaking for these families, but there is light at the end of the tunnel, and there is a drug that was released onto the market last year, and that's given these kids an extra 2 to 4 years, which is, for us, is not that meaningful, but for these kids and their families, it's huge. And right coming in behind that, researchers are developing a way to actually edit the genome of these guys. And right now, in a mouse model of this condition, they've managed to increase the lifespan of the mice by 61%. So it's not going to be too long before we can combine two of these, give these to their kids, and their lifespan is going to go from maybe 15 to 20 to 30 to 40, which is huge. And if we can do that, then there's no reason that we can't actually start to solve the aging problem for these kids and they can live normal lives. Why it's important in the context of what I want to sort of put these guys in here today was really that if we can solve aging for these guys, then there's no reason that we can't start to solve aging for we guys. And so the technology that we're learning and how to fix this problem will translate into something useful for us at the other end of our lives when we can start to actually perhaps mitigate aging or slow it down. So I want to do a little experiment with you guys. I want you to have a look at the back of your hand. It's probably a wee bit hard to do and with this light. I hadn't factored that in when I prepared the conversation. I know you know your back of your hand like your back of your hand, but I want you to have a look at it and just look at the aging. And apart from the youngsters in this room, we've probably got a couple of wrinkles and so on. And then I want to do this in your mind, please. I want you to compare it to a part of your body where the sun doesn't shine. And there's an incredible difference between that. And look, you've got the same body, you're dealing with the same pollutants, you're dealing with all of the oxidative stress the same. The key difference is UV. And UV is a radiation, and radiation damages DNA. So what we're actually seeing here is actually the physical manifestation of aging right in front of our eyes and what it causes, and the fact that it's actually directly attributable to your DNA damage. It's a really good reason to wear sunscreen for the youngsters out there. Cool. So next I want to talk a bit about some of the molecules that scientists are using and working out that we can actually slow the aging process. There's this particular diagram here is a picture of some mice that are healthy and mice with cancer. And they were given a drug called Rapamycin. And these mice lived considerably longer. So they went from perhaps 900 days, which is pretty standard, out to 1,300 days. And in fact, one of the mice in this particular study lived 1,400 days. And these mice were given rapamycin at the equivalent human age of 60. And when they took the rapamycin, they actually got to the age of 140 in human terms. So mice and humans and so on, we're not too dissimilar. So, you know, what we see here is entirely possible that you'll start to see it in humans. They've replicated this in dogs, they've replicated it in primates, and it's actually the research is starting to happen now, what happens when you use this for the human lab rat, if you will. We might not get to 140, but we're pretty sure that we'll actually get and add maybe 10 years, could be 20, and it could be very commonplace in 5-10 years that people get to 40, 50 or 60 and add this to their vitamin regime, so to speak, and it has a significant benefit in terms of longevity. What's really interesting with these mice that take rapamycin is they suffer from less cancer, less just pretty much anything that you associate with old age, that they had less of. There is research happening right now for people with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, cancer, etc., taking rapamycin, and those results will start to flow through over the next 5 years or so. It's extremely exciting, and it just shows that it is possible. And what was neat about rapamycin is that it's been researched so much, but it really keyed the research community into the fact that, hey, there is something that we can take which can slow the aging process. Before then, people just thought people were slightly nuts. All right, and then this particular molecule is really, really interesting. This is a molecule called Hobamine, and it comes from a really rare plant from the Himalayas called the Himalayan Tartary buckwheat. People have had it in their diet for millions of years, or thousands of years, and really nobody thought it was particularly special. But what researchers have found is that it deals with oxidative stress in a completely different way to anything that we've seen before. So to explain that, I've got a picture up here of a nano section of a little cell. This is a cell membrane, and we've just taken a wee slither of it. When you get a little bit of a free radical that floats up and it hits one of these membranes, what happens is it grabs a bit of that molecule and damages it. and then the free radical's happy and wanders off. And what happens is that that membrane essentially is radicalized, and it goes and does the same thing to the next bit of molecule next to it, and so on. So you get this cascade or domino effect through the membrane that can be really damaging. If you're lucky, it just deals with that yellow stuff, because that's just your membrane and that's easy to fix. But if you get one of the channel proteins or one of the other things, the other blue nicely coloured things inside this diagram, then you can actually have a significant impact on the cell. So what's unique about Hobamine is it goes and parks itself up in these membranes, and it actually is a circuit breaker that stops that cascade that goes on all the way through the membrane. So yes, you get a wee bit of oxidative damage, but it actually stops the wholesale damage in that particular membrane. And it might be a membrane, it might be your DNA, it could be any cellular component. This is really important, because what we've also learned is that free radicals aren't all bad. You actually need free radicals. And so if you stack yourself full of antioxidants, what can happen is you can mute the good stuff that free radicals do. Free radicals are important for messaging inside the cell, or messaging between cells, or even in the immune system when the immune cells shower the invaders with free radicals to try and damage them and hold them back whilst the rest of the immune system catches up. So the fact that we can actually now start to prevent oxidative damage in these vital cellular components, and DNA is one of them, without interfering with that free radical signaling, is actually a really significant breakthrough. This particular molecule is getting a huge interest from researchers around the world for things like heart disease, Alzheimer's. But if you think if you're protecting all your cellular components with this particular molecule, it's a really significant step forward. So we've set off on a small journey looking at what the ageing potential is, and it's very possible that we are going to be able to reach that potential of 115 probably a lot quicker than we think. With all technology, it increases exponentially, and so what took us perhaps the last 20, 30 years, we're going to get that level again in the last 5 years, and probably in a year's time it's going to increase again. So all of these things are going to start to come at us fairly quickly. We've got takeaways from the blue zones in terms of the plant-based diets, in terms of just making sure we move. And in fact, these are things we know anyway, but it's just really good that these things are documented, that they actually work. Now that we've got these 9 hallmarks of aging, scientists are going to start to really focus in on that, and we're going to start to get some huge gains in the aging. And what's really the main thing about all of that essentially is, let's slow down the aging process and defer all those diseases of old aging, which might get us in the end, but let's deal with them in our 120s or 115s, because that's a much better place. If we're living healthier and our bodies are working, then that means that we're going to live to 100 perhaps, and 100 might be the new 60, or the new 90s, the new 50. We don't know, but that's exactly the trajectory that we're going to. And who wouldn't want to live a healthy life for much longer? Because it means that we're going to experience more experiences, we're going to get to see our kids and their milestones, we might get to see their kids and their milestones, and maybe their kids as well. So these are the sorts of things that we're going to be able to start to enjoy. So that's a wrap. I just want to thank a couple of people. Adrienne Kohler, who without her, this book and project would just be a couple of ideas in a notebook on a shelf. So just thank you very much for helping me with those words. And Casey, wherever you are. Casey, for just putting up with being a book widow, and just genuinely being very patient with this for me during this project. Thank you.
I need to check the app at my end as well to see if there are any questions that have come through. In the meantime, I've got some questions that we've sussed out in front.
Yes.
That was very interesting. I learnt some more, even though I have already read the book. I was just looking at the blue zones, and
yes.
The takeaway from the blue zones is there are different, as a big Venn diagram, if it's possible to pull it up, I thought it was quite interesting that if we could choose some different things from those blue zones, are they all as good as each other? Because given the choice between one of them you could either do church, no alcohol and soy-based products,
yes.
or you could do empowered women in gardening. And I thought that sounds more like,
that's right. Yep.
If I could choose a blue zone, I'd go with the empowered women gardening place.
Absolutely.
I don't know about you.
Yeah.
Are each of these things created equally in terms of the outcomes they have on our aging, do you think?
Look, I think it was just doing it all together is really what it was. So yeah, certainly these people did different things. Certainly there were people that didn't drink alcohol, and that worked for them. And then the Italians, you know, they a glass of wine or two with their friends, and that seemed to work for them. So I think you just pick what you like out of that lot and just go for it.
If you did have one big piece of health advice, one takeaway,
Yeah.
apart from read your book, buy your book, read your book, what would it be?
Just move. I think it's the single biggest thing you can do. I think we've...
Leave Auckland.
Leave Auckland, yeah, exactly. Get active, right? Just if you know, whatever it is, but just do as much movement as you can. That just seems to be the single thing. And just the more and more research that people read, aging, walking, running, exercising just activates all sorts of wonderful biochemical processes that are beneficial for your health. And it's really a reflection of our biology, right? We're modern humans with ancient biology, and maybe 100,000 years ago we were running around chasing after our food, probably catching it and having nice long naps and so on. So it was probably a much simpler life, apart from the fact a saber-toothed tiger might come and get you. But you know, if we can try and replicate what those guys are doing, then you know, it's just going to suit our biology.
What got you interested in this subject to start with?
Yeah, look, I'm just a bit of a technology nerd, if you will, right? And so I love science and I love technology, and it's really just diving into those and then starting to look at, okay, well, look, if I've got these two skills, how do I put it together and do something with it? And so this book really is about helping people understand or translate the science in this really interesting paper and make it accessible to everybody, because actually it is, and we can actually all do this right now and start living a whole bunch healthier and live a lot longer.
For people that may not know you, though, you do have some background in this field, right?
Yeah. So I'm a pharmacist by profession, and I've been doing that for the last 30 years. Just across my career, it's been about technology, and it's just a mash-up. So I was involved in one of the first internet pharmacies in New Zealand, because that looked like a really interesting thing about 25 years ago. I've been involved in bringing robotics to New Zealand, and recently was the CEO of a biotech company. And so this is really just the culmination of 30 years of thinking and tinkering.
When you meet, you know, people who are, say, in their, you know, advanced age, 90s, 100s, a lot of them don't seem to be too bothered by the prospect of dying. You know, do you think when you get to 100, maybe you don't want to live to 140 all of a sudden? You've kind of done your dash. Yeah,
I think it's a really good question. I think that's some of the philosophers are going to have to answer that. I think if you are fit and well, I reckon you probably want to carry on living. But I think if you are getting tired and worn out, maybe it's time to hang up your clogs.
But it's about increasing the healthy bit of your life, isn't it?
Well, that's exactly the whole purpose of this. I mean, we get these diseases of old aging, and its aches and pains are as bad as, you know, Parkinson's and so on. So ultimately what we're trying to do here is actually go, right, let's get and keep our body in good working order, and then we don't have to deal with those concerns. And, you know, we're kicking the can down the road, so to speak. And if you can bungee jump at 100 because you've got a great body, why wouldn't you, right?
Someone sent a message in via the app saying, can you reverse the damage of UV to your hands or to your DNA? Yeah,
for sure. I think you can. We've got incredible DNA repair mechanisms, and so there's new technology coming now, actually a topical form of rapamycin, and that actually clears out, when you put it on topically, it actually clears some of the junk cells off your hand, and that rejuvenates your hand. And so yes, it's entirely possible.
That was something interesting. I mean, rapamycin, you look at that chart and you go, well, and you're saying it's working in primates. Is this something you can pop down to, you know, the pharmacy and buy now, or do you have to get it through the dark web? Is that where your technological interests come from?
Absolutely. So it's definitely available on the dark web. It's available. It's available in New Zealand, and rapamycin is actually used as an immunosuppressant, and it's used by people typically who have organ transplants, like kidney transplants, because it actually helps the body just ignore the fact that it's got something that's foreign in there. So the pills are here now. What's challenging is that not many doctors know about it, and so you're probably going to struggle to get them to prescribe it to you for anti-aging. But all of us here are actually young enough that we just need to wait 5-10 years, and it's quite possible that the researchers will make it available, and it'll be part of our Sunday morning routine.
We'll find an organ donor and make them a good offer.
Yeah, that's right.
One thing I found really interesting about the book was the studies around the impact of the psychological impacts on aging and how perceptions of aging and how other people perceive you can change the way you age, how well you age. Can you talk to us about that?
We spent a bit of time talking about that in the book, because actually your perception of age and how you enter it can actually have quite a massive impact on your aging trajectory. Like it or not, there's a whole bunch of ageism out here, and there's a lot of isms everywhere, and it's basically a thing where we are biased towards older people, and it affects us in terms of our work. I was talking to someone recently who's informed me that at 55, the average age to get a new job is actually 2 years. So these are the things that actually start to impact on you, and it causes all sorts of problems around it's depression and these are things that actually impact on your health as well. So if anything, keeping positive and attacking aging in a positive way is actually going to actually manifest in a positive aging experience.
Someone wants to know, is there any way you can track your internal age?
Yeah, there is.
I mean, what is your internal age for a start?
So what's come about recently is we've actually got two numbers. We've got two ages. It's your birthday today too.
It is, and thank you for inviting me to host a host the thing. Thank you. Yeah, the irony is not lost to me that I'm here talking about aging on my birthday. Yeah.
So we've actually got two ages. Our birth age, the chronological age, and that's reflected in birthdays and the numbers that increase each year. But what we've also started to understand is we've got a biological age. And that's, we can start to read that. It's essentially all you need to do is just deposit a little spit into a jar essentially and send it off to the lab. And the lab can actually start to look at the DNA in your cells, and your DNA accumulates a bunch of junk as we age, and so that's really closely correlated to what we call our biological age. So I'm sitting here in my early 50s, and I can actually have a biological age of 75 if I'm sitting on the couch drinking lots of beer and not doing much. I can also have a biological age of 35 if I'm bouncing out the door doing lots of running and eating well and eating a plant-based diet and following the Blue Zone methodology, if you will. And what's really neat about it is that it's actually plastic. You can change it. So if you get a bit of bad news in your report that says you're 75, if you get off the couch and make some changes, you actually can reverse that age. And when you do that, then you're actually measuring, and you can record how well you're doing, if you will, and that's sort of not been available to us in the past. And it's just a huge tool that we'll all be able to use soon to judge whether things are working or not, and if not, then changing it so that you find a way to reduce your biological age.
Do you think it's quite apparent, do you need to spit in the jar, or, say people always tell me that I look a lot younger than I am. Yeah. Is it that obvious, you can see the people that are obviously biologically aged, or is it sometimes it's hidden?
Yeah, look, it's a bit of both, and it's quite, I guess it's a wee bit sort of like an iceberg really. You see a little bit on the outside and the rest of it's happening on the inside. But no, you definitely see people that are running up hills in their 80s and 90s who just have more energy, look less, they just look young. And so these are the types of people that you don't really need to go and read their biological clock, because it's likely that it's going to look quite spectacular.
This is a good question. This is one of the things that when we first met, I was quite keen to discuss with you, which is the ethics around extending aging, whether that's via pharmaceuticals or other means, or just gardening and empowering women. How will the planet cope with so many people living if everyone can live longer?
Yeah, it's a huge challenge that we haven't answered yet, and we can look at some of the countries around the world where this is happening. Japan is a really good example of that. In Japan, there's a number of really interesting statistics. One of those is that there are more nappies sold to old people in Japan than babies, which is a glimpse into our amazing future.
There's only, in Japan, if I remember correctly from the book, there's only 2 people under 65 for every 1 person over, so that support ratio, just forget about the planet for a second, but just even economically it becomes very hard to support people, doesn't it?
There's no doubt that we're going to be moving into a very different way of aging, because there's no way that our social system can actually, and the two people that are working like crazy to support every one older person, it's just not going to work. So this particular technology is coming along at a fairly good time, because we may not retire, because we're fit and healthy. That means that we're going to have our third, fourth, fifth career, and it might not mean that we're working at the office 40, 50, 60 hours a week like we do now. It could be that we work 20, 30 hours, but that's just enough to top things up, and we adjust our lifestyle to suit. And some of these conditions, if we don't actually have to treat them for another 30 years, then our governments are going to be out of bank quite a bit of cash, because that's really where it gets expensive.
It strikes me also potentially from an environmental point of view, like the question we just had, that if we're living more lightly on the earth by plant-based diets, gardening and so forth, we might actually, it may not be so bad.
Yeah, and the other thing that's happening is that fertility rates are declining massively as well. So what they are predicting is that probably by the end of the century that our population will actually peak and start to decline. So things will balance themselves out, and it's not like having a whole bunch of old people on the planet's going to start cluttering it up. I think it'll actually balance out.
Another question has come in. We're facing a global epidemic of obesity and diabetes. How is that is going to shorten the life expectancy for many people? How will the hallmarks address that? And I had a similar question around cancer. When we we can extend our lifespan, but if we get cancer, we're still going to die sooner, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I guess it's a wee bit of lottery at times with cancer, that you can just can manifest at most inopportune times. But products like Rapamycin, for whatever reason, and they're still working on it, actually is an anti-cancer product as well. So it actually delays or defers us getting it. And
Sorry, I hijacked the question. Actually, it was really about diabetes and obesity.
So in terms of diabetes and obesity, we've just got to solve that problem. I mean, our Western diet has caused an epidemic of obesity. It's our sedentary ways, and in the future, when the historians look at this particular era, they are going to shake their heads at that we let people eat so poorly and didn't really educate them on exactly how we should eat. But there are technologies now which are showing that people, even with diabetes, type 2 diabetes, can reverse it with diet. So what we've got, we can claw back.
We've got so many questions coming. That's great. We're going to have to wrap this up soon. But some more from the audience. Is fasting good for you?
Yeah, it is. So fasting is really interesting, and it's a bit horrific for some people, the thought that they miss their 3 meals a day. But the body actually needs to be hungry. We've got this molecular switch in our body which is called mTOR, and it does a couple of things. When you eat, it switches on, and it creates a bunch of cascades in your body which help build muscle and build bones and do all good things. But if we have that switch on all the time, it's not very good for us. And when we're continuously eating, that's what happens. So to counteract that, fasting and not eating for a wee while actually turns the switch off, and that actually kicks off a whole bunch of housekeeping processes in our body, which clears all the junk and the proteins that are a wee bit broken and the cells that aren't working properly, clears them out, so that when we eat again, we can rebuild them nice fresh ones, and this seems to make us work better. So long answer to a question, but yes, fasting in moderation is particularly good for you.
Last couple of questions. Which of the 9 hallmarks, now you haven't, maybe, I don't know whether we can get them up on the screen, or you can just pick one. Yep. Which of the 9 hallmarks is the most important to anti-aging?
Yeah, so I think your DNA, looking after your DNA is the biggest one. It's got such a close link to aging, and it's your DNA is your instruction set, and you need that instruction set to be working well. What some researchers are starting to come up with is the fact that we start to age and things get a wee bit confused, is that our DNA starts to lose its fidelity, if you will, and we can't. It's just not being read as well as it used to be, and so that might mean that you start to get a bit of a skin cell and a brain cell, or a bit of a heart cell and a lung cell, and so this is thought to actually be a significant part of the aging process. So sunscreen, avoiding X-rays, minimising radiation, being careful with what you eat are all just super important strategies for protecting and looking and caring and nurturing your DNA.
There are many, many more strategies in the book, as well as some pretty deep dives on some of the exciting new products that are and research that's coming out there. I think we will wrap it up there. But thank you for coming along.
Thank you. Nice one.
Greg Macpherson, everyone.